Yolanda Barco, practicing attorney at the law firm of Barco and Barco in Meadville, Pennsylvania, and the president and chief executive officer of Pennsylvania Cable Network. Let me first ask you a little bit about how you got interested in the law, in the legal profession.
Well, Bill, I cannot remember a time since perhaps I was 10 or 11 that I didn't seriously believe that I would be a lawyer. Part of this was encouragement and direction from my father, I am sure. So that when I went to college, I knew I was going to take the pre-law course, which I did. But when I was in college, I had second thoughts.
What were the second thoughts in relation to?
Well, I was an economics major, and I was very interested in economics, both as a, let's say, an academic thing, and also in terms of living the capitalistic system. And so I told my father, I'm not sure I want to be a lawyer anymore. And he said, and I said I'd like to go to graduate school, and I had some fellowships offered to me. And he said, and of course my father is a very, very persuasive person. And he said to me, well, why don't you go 1 year to law school? And this is what he said, Bill. Every woman should go to law school for 1 year. Because, he said, nothing is sadder than to be left a widow and not know how to handle your affairs. Well, I agreed to go to law school for 1 year, and then I stayed with it and enjoyed it very much.
What was it like for you when you first graduated? You went into practice with your father.
Well, my father was a help, and then on the other hand, he was a person that lets you fight your own battles. I would tell you, first of all, that I was the only woman in Northwest Pennsylvania. Now, there were only woman lawyer. There were quite a number of them in Pittsburgh. By that I mean 10, 15 or so, maybe more, but those are the ones I knew. There was no one in Erie or any of the Northwest for at least 15 to 20 years. I had the ladies' room all to myself. And it was, I will tell you, Bill, very honestly, it was more difficult to be young than to be female. And you get over getting young.
Why is that? Why is it more difficult to be young?
Because lawyers, especially in the general practitioners like I was in Crawford County, they don't think you've arrived until you've practiced at least 10 to 15 years. And I had a problem in the fact that I was too diffident to older people. I had been trained to be courteous to older people, and I had a tendency, instead of meeting all the older lawyers on an equal basis, because I was young, I would tended to be subject to them instead of being person to person. I got over that too, though.
What kinds of law do you practice?
I would say that we were general practitioners, my father and I, but we concentrated in corporate and business work, in trial work, especially personal injury cases, and in administrative law. Then after we got into cable television, we began to specialize somewhat in cable television law also. I would say that my own strengths, as between my father and me, for instance, he was wonderful with juries. And you have to, there's a whole business of relating to them and communicating with them from the first time you start your case. And he was very good at that. I was good. What I was best at was argument court work, discussing law, either in the course of a case or on appeals that we took. And we divided important cases between us, and I would usually do the closing to the jury. By that time, they had gotten used to me, and I had, it took me a while to do the communicating, whereas he could do it right off the bat.
You had mentioned cable television, and I do want to get into that, but let me ask you first, what was it like growing up in Meadville, Pennsylvania, which is situated between Pittsburgh and Erie for this?
Well, I love Meadville as a town. It was a wonderful town, and it has it had a good, sound economic base with the town, with the railroad. Most of the people in my background of Italian origin came to work on the railroad, and then the Talon started in the 20s, perhaps the late 20s. Meadville was a town that they said never saw the Depression because Talon was growing at the time that the Depression started, and then the American Viscose was the other economic important entity in the county, and in the city, I should say, too. We had a wonderful, close family life. We had a wonderful relationship to the people that we lived with. We had a wonderful neighborhood, and on the whole, it was good.
Did you ever think about leaving the area because you grew up here and you practiced law here? Did you ever? I
had many opportunities to leave, in the sense that one of the things that was my experiences that I've had, and my father's had the same experience. We've had many more opportunities that we could take advantage of. And I know he had many opportunities. I can't say why, Bill, but I never seriously considered it. Even though some of these opportunities appealed to me very, very much. But I had opportunities from the time I graduated from law school. There were two business firms in Pittsburgh. Those were the days where they're just beginning to hire house counsel. And you see, I like the idea of being house counsel because, you see, I like the business part of it, and I like being a lawyer for a business. I had two wonderful offers. But I felt I owed my father something after that wonderful education I got, and I thought I'd come here and work for about 5 years and leave. But I got too tied up with the town and with everything in the practice, and it was hard to leave, and I never did leave.
Let's talk a little bit about cable television. How did you first get involved in cable television?
I was an innocent bystander. My father was the one who got involved. He loved anything that was a source of information. And he had heard about television, was interested in television. At that time, maybe I was still in law school. I can't remember which it was, but I was extremely young in practice. I don't think I was a lawyer yet. We went to New York to the Practicing Law Institute, which he attended regularly as a lawyer, taking continuing education courses. And he was very interested, and this was about 51. He was very interested that they had television, and he was looking forward to it, and he was paying $2 a day for it in his room. And, he began to complain to me that it wasn't working in his room, and I didn't pay too much attention to him. One day when I came back from shopping and went to his room, I saw that it was filled with people, and he had made such a fuss that they had brought the people who put the master antenna system in the hotel there to explain what was wrong. So that was his introduction to master antenna cable television. And he said, well, if you can do this for a hotel, could you do it for a city? And they said, they're a community, and they said, well, they're working on it. And so he started with the people who had this system in the hotel was RCA, and he began to communicate with RCA. And for about a year, they didn't do anything, and then they referred him to Gerald. And he went there, and that's how it started. Now, he got into cable television, unlike anybody that I know, because he wanted it for our town and for himself. It was never a business venture of any kind for him. And he was always, as we said, a consumer.
You just mentioned Gerald, and you get involved with Gerald. Can you tell people what exactly Gerald was and who ran it?
Well, Gerald was spelled Jerrold, and Milton J. Schaap's middle name was Gerald, and that's where the name of the company came from. And Milton J. Schaap, as I'm sure many of your viewers know, was the governor of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, but before that, he was a businessman who started in his garage with $500 of borrowed capital and ended up with the American Dream with Gerald Electronics Corporation, which was the major supplier and developer of electronic equipment for cable television systems. And for years, perhaps 10 to 15, was the clear leader. And Milton Schaap and his company were important to the development of cable television because they were a source of strength in the technology area and also in the business area as well. Mr. Schaap was a very, very fine person, and my father and he were very close friends.
And once your father got involved in this venture, how did you come in?
Well, it's a very strange thing, Bill, because I really was not an active or an active pursuer of this, but I liked the fact that it was a business. I told you I was interested in business. So when he became interested in it, and he formed Meadville Master Antenna, and there you see, you can tell how old we were, because Master Antenna really isn't a correct name for a cable company serving a community. It was then a community antenna television. Then it changed to cable television, but we were the old people that started when it was really simply an adaptation of the technology used in hotels and apartment houses. Anyway, I was thrilled because I became the general manager of this company. And I was general manager for a 5-year period until James J. Duratz came on the scene and he took that over. So I enjoyed it because it was a business venture. That was my interest in it. And of course, Bill, you cannot imagine the combination of circumstances in those early days because cable came from extremely humble beginnings. I mean, as I have said on other occasions, nobody in their right mind would have gotten into business. It had so many problems, so many things that had to be straightened out, that had to be dealt with. The technology was not developed much. People didn't like the idea of having to pay for what they thought other people got for free. Nobody would lend you any money. The legal basis on which you were picking up signals was not established. There was a question as to whether that was appropriate. And getting a place in the rights of way, in the public rights of way, was very, very difficult. And dealing with the utility companies was difficult. So all these problems were there. And but at the same time, the industry had an irresistible appeal. So many people would join it and never leave it. You know, we would go to conventions and the people that were just taking the recordings of the proceedings would stop that business and get into cable. It had a lot of appeal. So I have been interested very much in the economic and business side, and I think it's a great privilege that I had to see this grow from a small mom and pop peripheral kind of business that everybody thought was short term. Everybody thought we were in it just until something would happen which would take care of these blank spots in the in the reception, and most of the people in the beginning thought we were simply supplementary to broadcasting to take care of reception problems in the outlying areas or in the areas behind mountains. My father never looked at it that way. He always thought it had the potential of being a multiple service type of thing beyond simply being an adjunct to broadcasting.
Let me ask you, you'd mentioned some of the legal issues, and I guess you were in a unique position.
Yes.
Because not only were you involved in the cable industry, but in the legal profession. Can you go into some of your involvement in the early legal issues?
Yes, I can, and I want you to know that this was the interesting thing about my father and me. He was interested in the service very much. He wanted it to grow. He spent a lot of his time encouraging everybody that he came across to develop the technology. But as far as working in it, it was all the law for him. I, on the other hand, I worked right with him on the law, but I was interested in the business as such. You cannot imagine how weak the industry was to begin with when you had to remember that we had to build plant on public rights of way, and as I say, the law as to whether or not we had a right to be there was not clear, and we had bare permits from the municipalities, and the municipalities simply would say to us, okay, you can occupy the rights of way, but you have to get on existing utility poles. But they would have nothing to do with seeing that we got fair treatment from these utility companies. So we had to deal with people who were holding all the cards, who didn't much want us on the poles to begin with, because we were, somebody they had to deal with, they didn't want to deal with. And especially the telephone companies were very unfair in their treatment, but we had no one to go to. My father's extremely important in this period because he helped clear the way for many of the operators, and they were just small town business people. Most of them, or a goodly number of them, were television and dealers, and they were in it to sell sets. But most of them had good enough relationship, and remember, this was a small town business, that they knew the people, so he would help clear the way, legally speaking, and for solicitors and that sort of thing in cases where it needed to be done. And also, however, the most important legal work we did was in negotiating with telephone and power companies to try to get fair and workable conditions. As an example, Bill, almost all of the agreements in the early days, even though it cost thousands of dollars for us to put in a mild plant, provided that we got no rights for being on the poles, no matter how long we were there, and we could be asked to leave on 6 months' notice. We couldn't change that provision. We tried, and we had some strategies we used, but legally speaking, they could tell you to get off the poles. You had all your plants. What'd you do? But you see, they never could do it because the service was so popular with the people. And what was in the contract really didn't matter. But you didn't know that before you put your money down.
What about the FCC? You were on a panel of cable, or represented cable on some regulations.
Well, the first area of our involvement with any government, with local government, to get, and I call it the permit, or the resolution authorizing or allowing you to use the public ways. Later, they became franchises. Franchises are different because they gave certain legal rights. And I have to tell you that the first period of cable, which I would say was from 1950 to 1965, in the late 60s, was one where, you know, the municipalities were only involved in allowing you to get on, and they didn't get involved with giving you exclusivity or regulating you in any way. And those permits, by the way, those earlier ones required that you do whatever was required for safety. But then, starting in the late 60s, the more serious investors became in there, and they began approaching cities to get franchises and to get certain bundle of rights to protect their investments. And then they began to compete for franchises. And I think one of the unfortunate episodes in the development of the industry was the cutthroat competition that developed for franchises, with companies offering things that were absolutely out of the question. And there's a lot more I could tell you about that, but in the end, they infused or gave a lot of power to municipalities. And the industry generally in that period and in the 70s, the industry was in favor of municipal regulation of the industry. My father and I were always strongly opposed to that. We did not think that this industry, with all of its multiple municipalities, its eventual nationwide influence, should be governed by municipalities. In Meadville, for instance, we were in, I would say, 15 municipalities to take care of 30,000 people. You had to go to every one of them. Now, fortunately, we started at a time when there wasn't any great regulation. But as I say, in most of the later ones, there was. So then in 1972, the Federal Communications Commission, and by the way, at the same time, during all this period, especially the early 5 to 6 to 8 years, there was forays into regulation by state public utility commissions. And that was another legal issue that my father was very much involved in. At first, his efforts were simply as one of the cable people, but he became, in 1955, I believe, general counsel. At that time, then, he was representing the Pennsylvania industry. So there was this city regulation, or this municipal regulation. There was always hovering over us public utility regulation, and then the FCC felt it had some interests. So they formed this committee, and I was one of 4 or 6 industry people on this committee that was supposed to study and make a recommendation to the FCC as to how this industry should be regulated. And the industry, except for me, took the position that they should be regulated by what they called the most local level of government. The state people on the committee thought that they should be regulated by the PUC, and I was one of the few people thought that they should be regulated by the FCC. My position was absolutely shocking to the industry. And of course, we were very well known by the industry at that time. But the reason the industry didn't want state regulation was because they knew that the state regulation, first of all, would be public utility, which economically was not appropriate for cable. But more importantly, the reality was that the State Public Utility Commission was pretty much the turf of the telephone companies. So, you know, they had their inside track there. And the industry did not want the FCC because it had connections with the broadcast industry, which was another industry that we had problems with. But I felt, Now, in this particular field, my father was not really involved in the position I took. That was my own position. When the report went in, there was a majority report, which was the industry's report, that went for the most local level of government. And then there was the minority report, which said either the PUC alone, or the state regulatory agency alone, or the state and the city. And that was another serious problem because in some ways there were two layers. And I was the only one who said that the city should be involved only with seeing that the rights of way were safe and the construction was correct. But as far as regulating the industry, it should be done by a group that would have national jurisdiction. And remember, we wanted some help on these pole attachments too, which we certainly were not going to get any place but at the FCC, and that's where we got some. And so my statement was what we called an unaffiliated statement, and it went in over myself. And in 2 years, now at that time we were being regulated by local government under support by the FCC. In other words, the FCC approved of it, and everything we did at the local level was with their direction and with their approval. And in 2 years after these reports went in, the Federal Communications Commission withdrew local jurisdiction, or greatly reduced it. And I don't know where we'd be today if they hadn't. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. What kinds of, I want to get the Pennsylvania Cable and Telecommunications Association, I guess that's now.
Yes, they call it, that's what we're called today.
Formerly,
the Pennsylvania Cable Television Association is now the Pennsylvania Cable Telecommunications Association.
Can you tell us a little bit about the beginnings of that and why it was necessary and your involvement?
It was formed as a nonprofit corporation, a trade association in 1957, and I was one of the incorporators. But as informally speaking, we were working informally together for at least 3 to 4 to 5 years before that time. And mostly because of the PUC problems, and to some extent, we began to get into the telephone and power company problems. In that period before 1957, it was an unincorporated association. We met whenever we needed to, but we had excellent participation. I mean, when there was a problem, everybody came together. My father, more or less, was in charge as the lawyer, because we only met on the kind of legal issues, PUC and the telephone issues. Then we formed this organization. The first president was Bob Tarleton, and we continued in a more formalized way. Its main purpose was to take care of industry concerns involving regulation, and our relationship with the utility companies. As time went on, we became involved in issues like the copyright issue. And one thing, Bill, you have to recognize is that the Pennsylvania Association was, during the early period, and I would say for some time, by far the strongest state association, had tremendous influence nationwide, and many of the policies of the national group were started at the Pennsylvania Association level and went up. I was a director for a good many years. I think something, I can't remember now, but 15 to 20 years, and the president for 3 terms.
Did cable come into its own in Pennsylvania? I mean,
oh yes. The industry as a business, there's a little question as to which system was the first system, but that's pretty much resolved now. as to which was first, but there's no question that as a business enterprise and as an industry, it started in Pennsylvania, and the industry's whole impetus and direction and leadership was in Pennsylvania. Milt Schaap had his Gerald Electronics here, which was the big supplier of electronic equipment. And we had more cable companies in Pennsylvania with more denseness and people being subscribers than any place else. Of course, California, later on, maybe 15 to 20 years later, became much, much bigger than us. But as far as influence on the development, it was Pennsylvania.
How do you see the industry today?
Well, boy, that's a tough one, Bill. I told you that I was disappointed when the industry went for this most local level of government regulation. The thing that has always been a problem with me in the industry, and I'm not, I am part of the industry. I am a cable person, but I would say that one of the things that I think has been a shortcoming on our part comes from our roots and our background as being essentially territorially fixed. In other words, we went for permits to do business in a certain place, and we have always seen ourselves individually as being the cable company serving this geographic area. I think the industry has never taken the time to have put an act together nationally in order to develop a real interconnection for the best use of our technology. Today, one of the things that as a cable operator in the early days when I talked about humble beginnings, we didn't get any respect from the broadcasters. They thought our technology was very Mickey Mouse. We got no respect from the telephone companies because they thought we were here and gone tomorrow, and that we didn't even own any part of the place where our business rested. But the interesting thing is that our technology has proved to be the technology as far as what we can get into the home. About the industry today, my wish would be that we had more unified and coordinated treatment on the development of the telecommunications part of the industry. It cannot develop as fast and as well as it should when we are all, the other part of cable is the entertainment part and the relationship to this given geographical area. And we tend to be rooted in our geographical area instead of in the universe. So I think it'll all come out okay in the end, but it won't be as fast as it should be, and it won't be as perhaps as well done as it could be. See, we have the entertainment is one part, and then the telecommunications is another part.
Pennsylvania Cable Network. Talk a little bit about the beginnings of the network.
The Pennsylvania Cable Network is just an extremely fine indication of the kind of leadership Pennsylvania has always had in cable. There isn't anything like it anywhere else in the country. It started out as a purely voluntary enterprise by 11 cable companies. My father was a leader, but he was just one leader of this entire 11 group that on their own organized this effort to interconnect the cable companies in Pennsylvania for the distribution of educational programming. And there was a partnership between the industry, and PCN represented the industry, and Pennsylvania State University, which represented higher education, to do the programming. And it started in 1979, and we went statewide in 1983, and the 24-hour service was provided from 1983, and it was run with the partnership until about 1997, when PCN took over the entire channel and began to, or continued in a change of emphasis from education to public affairs programming. In 1989, my father passed away, and after he passed away, we had an entire review. His focus was on education. And Bill, while Penn State did a very fine job, and while we did do good work, the public never went for education as strongly as we thought they would. The cable operator who participated did not get a bang out of it. His public didn't seem, I told you, they're very sensitive to their own markets, and people were not that interested somehow. So after my father passed on and I was named president, we had a thorough review of everything and I made a point to talk to every MSO at the highest level I could reach, talk to them about what they thought we should do. They said we were still interested in education, but what we really want is public affairs programming. That's what they said. So we began to change our emphasis. And it is true that public affairs programming has had much stronger acceptance and interest on the part of viewers and cable operators than the education did. Now, we still have a commitment to higher education, and we still feel that there's an important place, but the thing that's fueling what we're doing now is the public affairs programming.
Why do you think that is? Were you disappointed that the public didn't go for the educational program?
I was surprised. But, we made tests of who was taking these courses that we had. And my father's dream was that we would do something for literacy, which he considered to be a terribly important matter. And he was interested in literacy. As a matter of fact, that was one of the big things he hoped this would do. And higher education for people who could not afford it or get it any other way or weren't able to go to campuses and things. When we made the surveys, we found the people with education were the ones who were using it. In other words, the educated people wanted more education, but the uneducated didn't come. You need something, you have to have a lot to move them in that direction, and we didn't have anything to move them in that direction. There wasn't the third component, which is heavy, heavy promotion. So that's all I have to say about that.
What about the importance of public affairs?
Oh, I think it's very important. And I think that the Pennsylvania Cable Network is involved in a new kind of service, which I think the industry, should get on with. See, all of the effort and this diversity so far is all nationally oriented, excepting for some local sports efforts. But all the programming is national programming. I mean, where is the diversity as far as the things that are common to an area? And you know as well as I do that the states have very important functions in the affairs of government and in the affairs of life. And I think that the Pennsylvania Cable Network is on the frontier of a important development and what can happen when you interconnect a community, and in this case, we're talking about Pennsylvania. I think it's going to have a tremendous influence on our state government, and I think it will have influence in other areas because it just isn't state government, although that's the most important aspect of it. It's all the other things we do which make people more aware of our heritage, of our very valuable resources, of our ethnic richness, of our history. These things are all important for the community. And I think we're in a very, very experimental and development place, and I don't think we in PCN yet understand the importance of what we're doing.
Do you see the industry moving in that kind of a direction, or where do you see the industry moving?
Unfortunately, I do not see the industry moving in that direction as much as I think it should. Now, you know as well as I do that a lot of people ask us what we're doing and how we're doing it and so forth. But there has to be an element of leadership on the part of the industry to do this. I think it isn't good for the government to do it. It doesn't work if the government does it. And I think that I'm hopeful that we will lead the way and that the industry will, but I don't think we've had enough of a national impact yet to do it, but I believe that as soon as we reach a certain point of critical mass, see, we don't have enough subscribers yet, Bill. We're coming there and we're reaching it, but you know that this whole enterprise has had to be sold we have a few leaders with us, but there are a few leaders we don't have yet. And when we reach the point that we really have most of the subscribers, I think you're going to see a difference in the impact of what we do and its influence not only in Pennsylvania but nationwide. I think when that happens, others will begin to follow suit.
You had mentioned leaders, and I want to ask you, in your opinion, where do industry leaders come from? It seems like this is an industry, the cable industry, that was built from the ground up by various different people. And as it develops, where do leaders, I guess, emerge from? How do you...
Yeah, well, leadership was easier in the days of the mom and pops than it is today. We had some marvelous industry leaders up until, I would say, the end of the 1970s. But the bigness of some of the large MSOs is such that there is no possibility for the development of leadership that can really be effective. Now, I think many of the MSO leadership at the very top, if you read, for instance, what the Comcast top management writes about and what the TCI top executives write about, they sense that they need this. And some of them are going in the direction of decentralizing the organization. But in the end, leadership, excuse me, is like anything else. It starts with education at the ground level. I mean, it is not something that happens once a person has arrived at a big important job. The whole business of being a leader is something that has to be developed, just like good citizenship and just like other good qualities of character. And you have to be a leader in your community before you can be a leader anyplace else. And you have to be a leader. You have to be willing to take what leaders take. Now, followership is very important too. I mean, you know, We can't all be leaders. But I learned a lot when I was on city council about leadership. And it's like there aren't as many people who want to be trial lawyers anymore because people don't like to lose. And if you're a leader, you're going to have to lose some. And so the whole idea of leadership, I think you put your finger on something that's very important, Bill. We do not have leaders enough for the country at this time at any level. We don't have them. I mean, if you look even at the United States government, how many leaders are there?
Let me ask you a little bit about politics. You mentioned city council, and I believe you were deputy mayor for a period in Meadville. Did you ever think about running for anything else?
Oh, yes. The thing I'd like to have done the most that I never got to do and that I could have done, and I mean, I had a good shot at being elected. As a matter of fact, I could have been elected easily, and that was, and I never wanted to go to Washington, but I always wanted to go to state government. I always wanted to be a state senator. That's what I wanted to be. And I wouldn't have been opposed to being governor. And I really think I might have had a shot at it if I had gotten into politics, because I see the way it works, and there's no reason it couldn't have happened. When Bud Dwyer left and he was a senator from our area, the position was wide open, and I could have had that without any trouble. But see, that's where my problem with being rooted in Meadville and all the things I was doing, practicing law and cable. Cable had a big hold on me too. I would have had to leave cable television totally to get involved in politics.
Are you glad you didn't do that, looking back on it, or is it something you always wondered about?
Well, I mean, it's like everything else. I think that a lost opportunity is always something you regret some way. I mean, a lot of things I would like to have done that I never got to do. I mean, you can only live one life, Bill, let's face it, and as people go, I've had more of a shot at it than many people have. I've done 2 or 3 very interesting things.
You had said you never wanted to go to Washington. Why the state government as opposed to Washington?
I suppose that it's because I think there is a lot more. See, that's why I liked being on city government. Some of my lawyer friends just thought, when I went for this position, they said, "Are you mad? There's nothing but heartache there. If you want something, go for something bigger." But you see, you can make a difference if you're on. You can make a difference in the city of Meadville for sure, and I think you can make a difference in Pennsylvania. I think making a difference in Washington is a long shot. Maybe you could, but it's not. I mean, I'd rather work where the results are clearer. It's just too much uncertainty there. I think I could have made a difference in Pennsylvania, just as I think we're making a difference in cable in Pennsylvania.
Let me ask you about some other things. I believe within the Bar Association, you formed a committee that helped people that couldn't afford legal services.
That's right.
Was that an idea you got from somewhere else? How'd that come about, and what?
Well, I was very young when I started practicing law, and I told you I was the only female at this bar. And I will tell you, Bill, I must tell you that among the businessmen and among the lawyers, I never felt that there was any real antagonism or discrimination against me on account of my gender. I never felt that way. I always felt pretty much accepted. As I have said in other cases, any new lawyer starts at zero in this area. I mean, you are zero. And you have to prove yourself, and in the proving, they expect you to be awkward, they expect you to be uncertain, they expect you to do some dumb things. And I can do as many dumb things as any man can do. So there was nothing, it was all, but the point of your question, I've lost it now. Put me on track again.
Yeah, the legal aid to people that couldn't afford.
When I started, as I said, I was very young, and I didn't have a lot of preconceived notions. There was a state committee that was just starting. There was no organization here, but there was a state organization at Harrisburg that was beginning to get involved with taking care of legal needs of the poor. So I suggested, now understand, I'm down at the end of the totem pole here, and I suggested to the bar that we have such a committee. And of course, you know, a couple of them said, you know, just like a woman comes in here and starts wanting to do something like this. They all felt they did a lot of this work. And I said, well, let's organize it so that we know that everybody's taken care of. So we formed this committee, and it was called the Service of the Public Committee. There were 4 areas that we were to be concerned with: taking care of services for the poor in civil cases was the primary. As far as the criminal thing, the court took care of that. They always saw to it that a criminal defendant had representation. But these are civil cases. And there were other areas. Another area we were to work in situations where the case was such that fair representation couldn't be gotten because the person, the public sentiment was so much against them, and we were then to see that the person would have adequate representation. We formed a committee, and it worked very, very well for a number of years. And then the federal government came in and began to require services, and then they began to have as a program service for the poor. And when they started that, then this one that we established was defunct. But we were in business at least for a good 20 years.
And talk to me about your involvement with the University of Pittsburgh. They might recognize your last name there.
Well, you hit something there that's very interesting. My father, Milt Schaap appointed my father as a member of the Board of Trustees of the University of Pittsburgh. And it was work that my father just loved to do. He enjoyed it tremendously. You know, so many things he did, he was giving. Somehow his work at the university was something that enriched him, and he got a lot out of it personally. He was very effective there too, and he was a member of the executive committee. After he passed on, as a courtesy to me, there were some things came my way because of my father, some things did not. This one did, on account of my father, and they asked me to be on the board, and I was. And I will tell you, Bill, that I have great respect for the university, but it's not one of the things that I did that I was particularly effective. The place is tremendous. It's huge, it's complicated, and to become effective, you have to spend a lot of time just learning how the thing works. And while I did the best I could, I did not feel that I was as effective in this area as I've been in others.
And what about the Barco Law Library?
Yeah. Well, the Barco Law Library was something that my father and I did for the law school that we graduated from. My father, as you know, was a very generous man, very interested in philanthropy, but he always considered any gift he made an investment. And he didn't think he just gave money. he always thought you ought to know just exactly what the money was going to be used for, and you ought to have some idea of what the return should be on the money. And the library was something he and I were both interested in. So he and I arranged to make a gift to the university, conditioned that the university would see to it that the basic support was provided. We did not want to give money and then the university cut down their gift. Everything we gave was for enhancements, to make it better. The idea was that the basic facility and service should be provided by the university. Then we provided the extras. The matter of conditional gifts is something we have done before the Meadville Area Recreation Complex, which you don't know this, but we have a gift arrangement there that's conditional that has caused some people to be concerned, but it's part of the idea that you give a gift that you want to see is used well.
Let me ask you a little bit about the Barco Duratz Foundation. First of all, could you explain what that is and its goals?
The Barco Duratz Foundation was founded in 1987 by my father, who was the first president, and it was originally funded with mainly his funds, and it was also a vehicle for having flexibility so that eventually some of his long-term goals could be met, and some of these could not be done in his lifetime. They were just too involved. He had a half a dozen things he was interested in. 2 of them he did in his lifetime, and the others, those of us who are coming after him know about and are to see to it. By principle, if not the principal purpose, is to advance continuing education. That's a principal purpose of the foundation. Now, since it was formed, other funds have come from other family members, so it's one of the principal things we have done to date was to help with PCN in its educational phase, and we're still helping educationally with PCN. And there are other things that we want to do as soon as the situation develops, educationally speaking. But we're not limited. We can do these other things as well. There are some things related to the community here that we are working on too.
Let me ask you about the Cable Television Hall of Fame. Recently had an induction ceremony. Your father was inducted, and you spoke. What was that experience like?
And just an outstanding experience, Bill. Just an outstanding experience. My father and these other people that were elected had the greatest honor given to them. Remember, these 6 men were chosen out of all of the people involved in cable for 50 years over the entire United States. These 6 men were selected of all the people, these 6 were selected. And as you know, 3 of them are from Pennsylvania, Milt Chapp and my father and Martin Malarkey. The reasons that my father was selected were because of his advocacy for cable in those early years, and the force and help he gave to helping to establish the bundle of rights that cable needs to operate in terms of the rights of way, of the utility arrangements, and as it later developed, the copyright basis for what we were doing and the legal basis for being able to, the master antenna concept, which undergirded the legal right to pick up signals. For that, his advocacy for that, and his advocacy also for keeping the industry independent of domination by the other industries that were connected. And there again, the copyright owners were people that were could have taken over the industry. The telephone company was another, and the broadcasters were the third. After we survived, after the survival, the effort was to keep us free, and that's one of the things he did. And of course, the third thing had to do with his interest in education and the number of things he did to advance education within the industry, including PCN and including the efforts that he made, for instance, for the establishment of Station QLN up here in Northwest Pennsylvania, and the help that the association gave to the establishment of the statewide public television network.
Yolanda Barco, practicing attorney, Barco and Barco in Meadville, and President and Chief Executive Officer of Pennsylvania Cable Network. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.